In a room full of veterans and families, one folded photo was holding more than just a memory. It was holding the last thread of hope. The VA hospital waiting room in Texas felt colder than it should have. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. A television in the corner played muted news no one was watching. Rows of metal chairs were filled with people staring at forms, phones, or the floor. The air carried quiet tension, the kind that comes from waiting on decisions that control your future. Serena Whitlock sat alone near the window, though the blinds were half closed. She was in her early 40s, her posture upright but fragile. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a folded, worn photograph. The edges were soft from years of being opened and closed. She pressed it flat against her knee as if trying to steady herself. Just 10 minutes earlier, a nurse had spoken gently but firmly. "Your benefits review has been delayed again, Ms. Whitlock. The approval board hasn't finalized the decision. We'll notify you as soon as we hear back." Delayed again. Her medical treatment depended on that approval. Without it, appointments would pause. Medications would wait. Time would stretch in ways her body could not afford. She swallowed hard and forced her breathing to slow. Crying in a public waiting room felt like surrender. She had promised herself she would not fall apart in front of strangers. Across the room, Colton Reeves sat with his 7-year-old triplets, Jace, Kala, and Bryn. He held a clipboard filled with his own paperwork. As a widower raising 3 children alone after losing his wife to cancer, hospital rooms were not unfamiliar to him. He had learned how to sit in them without letting fear show on his face. The children sat close to him, their small legs swinging slightly above the floor. They had grown up reading silence carefully. When their mother was sick, they had learned to notice the way adults tried to hide pain. Kala was the first to look toward Serena. "She's holding that picture really tight," she whispered. Jace followed her gaze, like it's going to disappear. Bryn tilted her head slightly. "She looks like when Dad thought we were asleep, but wasn't." Colton glanced up briefly but returned to his paperwork. He had learned to focus on his own lane in places like this. Everyone carried something heavy. But the triplets kept watching. Serena's fingers pressed deeper into the folded photograph. Her knuckles turned pale. She stared at nothing in particular, but her eyes were glossy with emotion she refused to release. The waiting room felt heavier around her, as if the air had thickened. A man across from her coughed it. A nurse called another name. Time moved, but Serena felt stuck. Jace leaned closer to his sisters. "She looks like she's about to give up, but she doesn't want anyone to see." Bryn's voice dropped. "Maybe she doesn't have anyone." Those words landed softly but deeply. Colton finally looked again. This time, he noticed what the children had sensed immediately. Serena was not just frustrated. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something final. Her shoulders were tense, but her eyes looked tired in a way that went beyond one bad day. Serena unfolded the photograph slowly, just enough to look at it. For a moment, the faint outline of a military uniform could be seen. She touched the image gently with her thumb. Her lips moved as if speaking to someone who was no longer in the room. Kala's chest tightened. She's talking to the picture. Colton shifted slightly in his seat, uncertain whether to intervene or respect distance. Hospitals taught you boundaries. Everyone's pain was personal. Suddenly, Serena's phone buzzed in her hand. She flinched. She looked at the screen, read something quickly, and her breath hitched. It was likely another automated message, another delay, another form. Her grip on the photograph loosened. It slipped from her fingers. The folded photo fell to the floor between the rows of chairs, landing face up near the triplets' feet. Jace was the first to lean down. Kala gasped softly. Bryn froze, because what they saw in that photograph was not just a memory. It was something that connected directly to the hospital they were sitting in, and to the reason Serena was there at all. They looked at each other, eyes wide with understanding. This was not just about delayed paperwork. This was about something much deeper. When the triplets saw what was inside Serena's fallen photograph, they realized her fight wasn't just for benefits. It was for a promise she refused to break. Some men do not cry in waiting rooms. They learn how to breathe through the pain instead. Long before the VA hospital became just another place to wait, Colton Reeves had sat in a different hospital hallway with his hands clasped so tightly they turned white. His wife, Marin, had fought cancer for 3 long years. There had been hopeful months and crushing setbacks. There had been whispered promises that they would grow old together. And then there had been the final night. when machines beeped steadily and doctors spoke gently but clearly. When Marin passed away, Colton did not have time to collapse. He had 3 5-year-olds staring up at him, waiting for answers he did not know how to give. He became both mother and father in a single breath. He learned how to braid Callah's hair by watching online videos. He practiced packing school lunches without forgetting notes inside. He memorized medication schedules, soccer practice times, and bedtime routines until they became automatic. Grief did not disappear. It just moved quietly into the background. Medical bills followed them long after Marin was gone. Insurance covered some, but not all. Colton worked extra hours at first, taking any contract he could manage, but he quickly realized that money without presence cost too much. So he chose flexible remote work instead. Less pay, more time at home. He answered emails while stirring pasta. He took calls from his car in school parking lots. He chose to stay close, even when it meant turning down promotions. Some friends stood beside him in the beginning. They brought casseroles and kind words, but as months turned into years, invitations slowed. People did not know how to sit with ongoing grief. It was easier to step back. Colton did not blame them. He simply adjusted. He learned how to sit in hospital rooms without letting his face show fear. He learned how to speak calmly to nurses, how to ask questions clearly, how to hold his children's hands steady even when his own heart shook. That was why the VA waiting room felt familiar in a way he did not like. The fluorescent lights, the clipped voices, the sound of names being called into uncertain outcomes. It brought back memories of helplessness he had buried under routine. He avoided looking too long at Serena Whitlock at first. Emotional entanglement felt dangerous. Survival had taught him to focus inward. Protect your own. Do not carry more than you already hold. But the triplets had grown up watching him carry grief quietly. They had learned to read tension in the way he straightened his shoulders. They knew when silence meant strength, and when silence meant struggle. When Serena dropped the folded photo, they saw more than a picture. They saw the way her hand trembled as it slipped away. They saw how her eyes closed for a second, as if losing it confirmed her fear that everything else might be slipping too. Jace picked it up carefully, holding it by the edges. Callah leaned in. Bryn's eyes widened. Inside the photograph was a man in military uniform, smiling proudly. Beside him stood a younger Serena, her arm linked through his. Between them was a little boy in a wheelchair, grinning brightly. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "For Owen's future, we keep fighting." The phrase hit him harder than he expected. He understood promises made in hospital rooms. He understood fighting for someone else's future even when your own strength was low. Serena had not just been waiting for benefits approval. She had been waiting to continue a promise. "Dad," Callah whispered, "it's about her son." Colton nodded slowly. The weight of the room shifted. He stood up, crossing the short distance to Serena with steady steps. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. "Ma'am," he said gently, holding out the photograph, "I think you dropped this." Serena's eyes lifted, and when she saw the picture in his hand, something fragile in her expression cracked. She took it carefully, pressing it back against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Colton returned to his seat, but he could not ignore the image now burned into his mind. A child in a wheelchair. A written promise. Delayed benefits. A woman sitting alone. He told himself to focus. His children had appointments too. They needed him steady. But the folded photo would not leave his thoughts. Because something about the face in that picture, the little boy between Serena and the man in uniform, felt connected to the hospital in a way that reached beyond paperwork. And as Jace leaned closer and pointed quietly to the insignia on the uniform, Colton realized this was not just about one delayed review. It connected to something far bigger than a single waiting room decision. When the triplets noticed the insignia in the photo and whispered what it meant, Colton realized Serena's fight was tied to a promise made in uniform, and breaking that promise would change more than one life. Sometimes a single word written on the back of a photo carries more weight than an entire file of paperwork. The photograph looked ordinary at first glance. A younger Serena Whitlock standing in military uniform, shoulders straight, chin lifted with quiet pride. Beside her stood a small boy no older than 5, his hand wrapped around hers. His smile was wide, but his body leaned slightly toward her, as if even then he understood that closeness mattered. Jace had been the one to notice the writing on the back when Serena adjusted her grip on the picture. The faded ink read, May 12th. Promise. Kala's eyes softened when she saw it. Bryn's fingers curled slightly around the edge of her seat. Serena noticed the children looking at the photo, and for a moment she considered folding it away again. But something in their faces stopped her. They were not staring with curiosity. They were watching with care. He was 5 in that picture, she said quietly, her voice steady but fragile. His name is Owen. Colton sat still, listening without interrupting. He recognized that tone, the one people use when speaking about something they almost lost. I was deployed overseas for 9 months, Serena continued. When I left, I believed I was doing something meaningful, serving, protecting, providing for his future. Her fingers brushed over the word promise again. But while I was gone, she added slowly, things changed. She did not describe it in detail, but the pace between her words said enough. There had been custody disagreements, legal complications, distance made larger by silence. When she returned, the path back to stability had not been simple. I fought to rebuild everything, she said. But the stress, the injury I sustained during service, and the years of legal battles took a toll. Colton's chest tightened slightly. He knew how systems could complicate what already hurt. My VA claim is tied to complications from that deployment, Serena explained. Nerve damage and chronic pain that worsened over time. The treatment I need depends on approval, and if my claim isn't finalized soon, she paused. You can't keep the promise, Bryn said softly. Serena looked at her, surprised by how clearly the child understood. Yes, she whispered. Exactly. The word hung between them. Serena was not just fighting paperwork. She was fighting to stay strong enough to remain present in her son's life. She was fighting to prove that the years she served meant something, that the system she once trusted would not forget her. Colton felt the parallel settle in quietly. He had also watched support systems fade when he needed them most. Insurance forms, hospital bills, friends who promised to visit but stopped calling. Both of them had stood alone in rooms that felt too large. Do you have family here? Kala asked gently. Serena shook her head. My parents passed away years ago. Owen stays with his aunt during the week because of my appointments. I come here alone. Alone. The triplets exchanged a glance. They had seen that word before. Not written, but lived. They remembered nights when their father sat at the kitchen table long after they went to bed, staring at unpaid bills. They remembered the quiet strength he carried, so they would not feel fear. Serena looked at the floor briefly. Sometimes it feels like I served my country. But when I came home, no one was waiting. Colton's throat tightened. He understood that feeling more than he expected. He cleared his voice gently. You're still here, still fighting. She gave a faint, tired smile. I don't know how much longer I can fight alone. The waiting room buzzed with distant voices, but in that moment their corner felt separate from everything else. Jace leaned forward slightly. What happens next? Serena hesitated. Then she spoke the words she had been holding back. My appeal hearing is tomorrow morning, she said quietly. It's my final chance to present my case before the review board. Colton felt a subtle shift in the air. I've gathered all the medical documents, Serena continued. I've written a statement, but her voice faltered slightly. There's no one to stand beside me. The triplets went silent. They understood something instinctively, that sometimes strength does not come from having the perfect argument. It comes from not standing alone when you speak. Colton looked at his children. He knew that look in their eyes. It was the same look they had when they insisted on staying near him during difficult moments. Protective, steady. He had told himself to avoid emotional entanglement, to focus only on his own family's survival. But the photograph with the word promise would not leave his mind. Serena folded the picture again carefully, pressing it back into her palm as if drawing courage from it. I just need one more chance, she said softly. One more chance to prove I didn't serve for nothing. The triplets leaned closer to their father, their expressions quiet but determined. Because tomorrow morning, Serena would not just be facing a board of strangers. She would be facing the weight of a promise made years ago, and right now she had no one standing beside her. As Serena admitted her appeal hearing was tomorrow and she had no one to stand beside her. The triplets looked at their father with the same silent question. Would he let her fight alone? Sometimes the strongest act of courage is simply showing up for someone who expects no one to come. The next morning, before Colton could even finish pouring cereal, The triplets were already dressed and waiting by the door. "Where are you three going?" he asked, though he already knew. "To the hearing," Jace replied calmly. Kala picked up her small backpack. "She said she has no one, so we can't let that be true." Colton stood still for a moment, feeling the familiar tug between caution and compassion. Getting involved meant stepping into someone else's battle. It meant rearranging schedules, emotional energy, and boundaries he had built carefully since losing Marin. He remembered sitting alone during some of his wife's hardest appointments. He remembered scanning waiting rooms, wishing just one familiar face would walk through the door. Sometimes, strength is not about solving the problem. It is about not being the only one holding it. He exhaled slowly. "Finish your cereal," he said softly. "We leave in 20 minutes." The VA appeal office felt colder than the waiting room the day before. The walls were plain. The chairs were arranged in neat rows facing closed doors marked with official titles. Everything about the space felt procedural and distant, as if emotion did not belong there. Serena stood near the check-in desk, holding a thin folder against her chest. Her shoulders were tight, her expression focused but fragile. She looked like someone bracing for impact. When she turned and saw Colton and the triplets walking toward her, she froze. "You came," she whispered, disbelief softening her voice. Colton nodded. "You said you had no one." Serena's composure cracked. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "You didn't have to. We wanted to," Kala said gently. They sat together in the waiting area outside the hearing room. The triplets were unusually quiet, their small hands folded in their laps. They did not fidget or complain. They understood the weight of the moment. Colton asked to see Serena's paperwork while they waited. He organized the documents into clear sections: medical reports, deployment records, physician statements, personal testimony. Years of remote work and paperwork had taught him how to structure things for clarity. When her name was called, Serena's breath caught. She stood slowly. Colton stood too. "We'll be right here," he said. Inside the hearing room, 3 appeal officers sat behind a long table. The tone was polite but formal. Questions came in measured voices. Dates were clarified. Terminology was referenced. Serena spoke clearly at first, explaining her service, her injury, the worsening complications. But as the questioning continued, the atmosphere shifted. One officer adjusted his glasses. "Miss Whitlock, there appears to be a discrepancy between your initial injury report and the neurologist's updated assessment." Serena blinked. "That's because the nerve damage worsened over time." "Yes, but the original file does not include the updated diagnostic imaging." Colton watched from the back of the room, reading the tension in her shoulders. He had seen that posture before, the one that says confidence is slipping. She opened her folder, flipping through papers carefully. "It should be here," she murmured. The officer leaned back slightly. "Without the imaging documentation formally entered into the system, the board may have to postpone the decision pending further verification." Postpone. The word landed like a weight. Serena's breathing grew uneven. She looked down at her documents again, flipping faster now. "I submitted it," she insisted softly. "My physician sent it directly." Jace leaned closer to Colton and whispered, she's starting to lose her voice. "Bureaucracy can drain strength faster than illness." He raised his hand gently. "Excuse me," he said respectfully. "May I clarify something?" "I reviewed her documents this morning," he continued calmly. "The updated imaging summary is included in the physician's statement section. It references the diagnostic code and progression timeline." He pointed toward the specific page Serena had overlooked in her stress. One officer leaned forward, scanning the document more carefully. Silence filled the room for several long seconds. "You're correct," the officer said finally. "The imaging summary is attached within the physician's affidavit." The questioning continued, but the tone softened slightly. She regained her steadiness, explaining the progression of symptoms and the importance of timely treatment. The triplets remained silent, watching closely. Their presence alone seemed to anchor her. But just as the hearing neared conclusion, another officer spoke. "There is still one issue," he said. "The official digital record of the updated imaging file is not appearing in our internal database. It may not have been fully processed." Serena's face drained of color. "If the digital record cannot be verified," the officer continued, "we may need to delay final approval until the file is located and formally logged." Colton felt the room tighten. A missing medical file was now threatening to push her case back months, time her health could not afford to lose. Serena Lowe okayed at the panel, then at the folder in her trembling hands, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the system was about to win again. As the appeal officer confirmed that a missing medical file could delay her case for months, Serena realized her health might not wait long enough, and Colton knew this fight was far from over. She had once worn a uniform with her name stitched over her heart. Now the system acted like it had never seen it before. The hearing room felt colder after the word delay was spoken again. Serena sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap, as the appeal officer explained the problem in careful, detached language. Ms. Whitlock, without the verified digital entry of your overseas injury documentation, the board cannot finalize benefit approval. The system requires confirmation from your original service record. Serena blinked slowly. But I submitted my deployment file years ago. The officer nodded politely. We see partial entries. However, the injury report from your overseas assignment appears to be misfiled under an alternate administrative code. Misfiled. The word felt smaller than the damage it carried. Without that specific documentation linking her nerve damage to her overseas service, her benefits would remain suspended. Treatment would stall. Medication adjustments would wait. And the promise she wrote on the back of that photograph would hang in uncertainty again. Serena's shoulders lowered slightly, not in anger, but in exhaustion. So because someone entered a code incorrectly, I wait? The officer did not respond emotionally. The system. Colton watched her face change in that moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet look of someone realizing that years of sacrifice could be reduced to a clerical error. After the hearing adjourned, Serena stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. The folder in her hands felt heavier than before. I did everything right, she whispered. I served. I documented. I submitted forms. And they lost my name in a filing error. Colton did not offer empty reassurance. He had learned that phrases like, "It'll be okay," can feel hollow. Instead, he stayed. We're not done, he said simply. The triplets stood close to Serena. Kala pulled out a folded sheet of paper from her backpack. On it, written in bright marker, were the words, "You kept your promise. Don't stop now." Bryn handed it to Serena quietly. For a second, Serena could not speak. Her fingers traced the letters gently. "Thank you," she said softly. Jace looked up at Colton. "Dad, can't someone fix the file?" Colton's jaw tightened slightly. "Someone can," he said. "They just need to care enough to look." He stepped aside and pulled out his phone. Years ago, when navigating Marin's treatment, he had connected with local veteran resource coordinators who helped families understand VA processes. Some numbers might be outdated, but he refused to walk away now. He called one contact. Voicemail, he called another. No answer. He left messages calmly, explaining the administrative error and urgency. He did not sound angry. He sounded steady. Meanwhile, the triplets sat beside Serena in the hallway. They did not ask heavy questions. They simply stayed near her. A few seats away, an older man with a volunteer badge pinned to his jacket had been listening quietly. His hair was gray, his posture relaxed but attentive. He approached slowly. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I've been volunteering here for 15 years. I couldn't help overhearing about a misfiled overseas injury report." Serena looked up, cautious but hopeful. "My name is Harold Benton," the man continued. "Retired Marine. I've seen this happen before. Sometimes records from certain deployments were archived under transitional codes during database updates." Colton stepped closer. "Is there a way to retrieve them?" "There is, but it requires a manual archive search request. Most people don't know to ask for it." "How long does that take?" Harold replied. "We might get preliminary confirmation within hours. Full verification could take longer, but at least the board will know it exists." For the first time that afternoon, hope did not feel imaginary. Harold guided them to a small administrative office down the hall. Forms were filled out carefully. Deployment dates were double-checked. Unit information was entered precisely. Emotional pressure built as they waited. Serena sat silently, preparing herself for disappointment again. She had learned not to expect quick miracles from complex systems. Colton watched her closely. He could see the fatigue in her posture. The years of fighting alone had worn her down. The triplets stayed beside her, their small hands occasionally touching her sleeve, reminding her she was not invisible. Hours passed. The office grew quieter as late afternoon approached. Then Harold's computer screen blinked with a notification. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. An archived file had surfaced, but as he opened it and scanned the contents, his expression shifted. Serena noticed immediately. "What is it?" The archived record was there. Her overseas injury report, properly dated, properly signed, but attached to it was an additional notation she had never seen before, and it contained a detail about her deployment that she had never told anyone. As the archived file finally surfaced late that evening, Serena realized the record held a hidden detail from her service, one that could either secure her future or reopen a chapter she had tried to survive in silence. The hardest promises to keep are the ones you think you already failed. The archived file glowed on the screen in front of them, no longer lost, no longer misfiled. Serena's overseas injury report was there in full detail, properly dated, properly signed, clearly linking her nerve damage to her deployment. The documentation confirmed what she had been trying to prove for years, but beneath the official injury report was an additional entry. Harold scrolled slowly. Hardship reassignment request. Dependent child concern. Serena's breath caught. She had almost forgotten the official wording of that request. During her deployment, after weeks of limited communication, she had filed paperwork asking for reassignment closer to home. Owen had been struggling emotionally. Custody arrangements had become unstable. She had tried to shorten her tour to stabilize her son's situation. The request had been denied at the time due to operational demands. Colton watched Serena's face change as she read. "They documented it," she whispered. "I didn't imagine it." Harold nodded gently. "It shows you requested reassignment because of concern for your son's welfare. That detail strengthens your case. It proves you were actively trying to protect your family." But Serena's eyes filled with something deeper than relief. "I thought he believed I chose the deployment over him," she said softly. "When custody shifted during that time, I wasn't there to fight it immediately. I always worried he saw it as me leaving." The weight of that confession settled into the room. Parental guilt does not fade easily. It grows quietly in spaces where explanations were never fully heard. Colton felt something inside him respond immediately. He remembered the nights he wondered if his children blamed him for not saving their mother. He remembered thinking that maybe he should have done more, asked more, fought harder. "You showed up in the only way you could at the time," he said gently. "You served, and you tried to come back sooner." Serena shook her head slightly. It didn't feel like enough. "Most love never feels like enough," Colton replied quietly. The triplets stood close, absorbing the exchange with quiet understanding. They had watched their father carry guilt over things beyond his control. They recognized that Ame's shadow in Serena's voice. Kala stepped forward carefully. "If someone tries to come back, that means they didn't want to leave." Serena looked at her, surprised by the clarity. Bryn added softly, "Sometimes grown-ups don't get to choose everything." Jace nodded. "But you wrote promise. That means you didn't forget." Serena pressed the folded photograph against her chest again. For years, she had carried the word like a reminder of what she feared she had broken. Now, seeing the official record of her hardship request, she realized something important. She had not abandoned her son. She had fought in the only way the system allowed her at the time. The appeal board reconvened later that afternoon, after Harold submitted the corrected archive documentation. The officers reviewed the newly surfaced file carefully. "This hardship reassignment request," one officer said, adjusting her glasses, "clearly documents ongoing family impact connected to your service period. And the confirmed injury report from the same deployment strengthens the service-related claim." Another officer added. The room felt different now, less skeptical, more precise. Colton sat behind Serena, not speaking unless asked, but present. The triplets sat quietly beside him, their posture serious but calm. They did not interrupt. They did not fidget. They understood this was a moment built from years of waiting. After reviewing the corrected file, the lead officer folded her hands. "Ms. Whitlock, based on the verified documentation, the board is prepared to issue a conditional verbal approval for your service-connected benefits." Serena's breath stopped. "Final authorization," the officer continued, "must be confirmed by the regional director. However, the board is recommending immediate provisional processing. Conditional, provisional, not final but not den." Hope moved slowly into Serena's expression, cautious but real. "Thank you," she whispered. As they stepped out of the hearing room, the hallway felt less cold than before. Serena leaned briefly against the wall, not from weakness but from relief. "I didn't break it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I didn't break the promise." Colton stood beside her, understanding fully that this moment was not just about paperwork. It was about forgiveness, the kind parents struggle to give themselves. "You were never alone in that fight," he said gently. "You just didn't have witnesses." The triplets smiled softly. Something subtle shifted between the two families then. This was no longer a simple act of kindness. It felt personal, shared, familiar. Serena looked at Colton with quiet gratitude that carried more than thank you. It carried recognition. But as relief settled in, reality remained. The board's recommendation still required one final signature from the regional director, and systems do not always move as quickly as Hope does. With the board granting conditional verbal approval, everything now depended on one final decision, and the regional director had the power to turn hope into certainty or delay it all over again. Hope is hardest to hold in the days when nothing happens. The days after the conditional approval felt longer than the months Serena had already waited. Each morning she checked her phone before getting out of bed. Each afternoon she refreshed her email twice, then 3 times, then told herself to stop. The board had recommended approval. The regional director only needed to finalize it. Only. But Serena had learned that only can stretch into weeks inside large systems. Her symptoms did not pause while paperwork moved. The nerve pain in her hands worsened slightly. Some mornings she struggled to grip a coffee mug. She told herself it was stress. She told herself to stay steady. But fatigue crept in quietly, reminding her that waiting was not neutral. It cost energy. Colton noticed the small changes. The way she flexed her fingers when she thought no one was looking. The way she leaned back more often during conversations. He did not say, "Are you okay?" every time. Instead, he showed up. He brought the triplets to visit after school. They sat at Serena's kitchen table with crayons and paper. They did homework while she sorted through her documents again, even though everything had already been submitted. Presents became routine. One afternoon, Bryn looked up from her drawing. "Why did you write promise on the photo?" Serena paused, the words softening her expression. She unfolded the photograph and placed it carefully on the table. "I promised my son that no matter where I went, I would come back strong," she said quietly. "I wanted him to know that serving didn't mean I stopped being his mom." "Did he believe you?" Serena hesitated. "I think he wanted to." Jace spoke gently. "Then you're still keeping it." Serena felt something shift in her chest. For years she had carried that word like a reminder of failure. Now it felt different. It felt like something still alive. Behind the scenes, the regional director reviewed her file, the hardship reassignment request, the verified injury report, the board's recommendation, the letters that had quietly begun arriving from the local veteran network. Harold Benton had reached out to former service members who knew Serena. They wrote brief statements confirming her deployment, her dedication, and the injury they remembered her pushing through without complaint. None of the letters were dramatic. They were simple, steady affirmations. She had not been forgotten. The tension built slowly, like a storm that might or might not arrive. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Serena's phone rang. The room went still. She stared at the caller ID for a moment before answering. "This is Serena Whitlock." Colton watched her face carefully. The triplet stopped coloring without being told. "Yes," she said softly. "I understand." There was a pause. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the phone closer to her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. When she ended the call, silence filled the kitchen. "Well?" Jace asked quietly. Serena looked up at them, and for the first time in weeks her eyes were not clouded by fear. "It's approved," she said, her voice breaking. "Full benefits reinstated. Treatment authorized immediately." For a second she did not move. Then the emotion hit all at once. Tears fell freely, but they were different from the ones in the waiting room. These were not tears of defeat. They were tears of release. Kala stood and wrapped her arms around Serena carefully. Bryn followed. Jace leaned in quietly. Colton stayed close, his chest tight in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. He had seen relief before, but not like this. Not after such long isolation. You kept your promise, Bryn whispered. Serena nodded through tears. I did. Light returned to her face in a way Colton had not seen before. It was not just about medical treatment. It was about recognition, about being seen by a system she once feared had erased her name. The house felt warmer somehow. For the first time since the VA waiting room, Serena did not look like someone standing at the edge of giving up. She looked like someone stepping forward. As they celebrated quietly with takeout pizza that evening, Serena's phone buzzed again. She almost ignored it, but when she glanced at the message preview, her breath caught. It was from her son's aunt. Her heart began to race, not from fear this time, but from uncertainty. She opened the message, slowly, and what she read made her sit down again. Just as Serena's treatment was approved, and hope finally returned, unexpected news about her son's current situation arrived, and it threatened to change everything once more. Sometimes the family you need is not the one you were born into. It is the one that refuses to let you sit alone. Serena's treatment began the following week. The hospital room no longer felt like a place of defeat. It felt like a place of progress. The nerve therapy sessions were tiring, but they carried purpose. Each appointment was no longer delayed by uncertainty. The approval letter rested folded inside her purse, not as proof of victory, but as proof that she had not been forgotten. For the first time in years, she did not walk into medical appointments alone. Colton sat beside her during the first treatment session, not speaking unless she looked toward him. The triplets waited in the lobby with coloring books and snacks, their presence steady and quiet. When Serena stepped out afterward, tired but upright, Bryn handed her a small note that read, "Promise, still strong." The word no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. The unexpected message from her son's aunt had carried news that shook her in a different way. Owen, now a teenager, had asked questions about her case. He had heard about the appeal. He had followed the updates quietly, and for the first time in years he had asked if he could visit her during treatment. Serena's heart had pounded when she read that message. Reconnection, after distance, is fragile. It carries hope and fear at the same time. Colton did not push her. He did not give advice. He simply said, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present." When Owen arrived the following Saturday, taller than the little boy in the photograph, Serena's hands trembled again, but not from pain this time. The first hug was awkward, careful, filled with years of unsaid words. But it was real. "I heard about the hearing," Owen said quietly. "You didn't give up." Serena swallowed. "I never planned to." They did not fix everything in one afternoon. They did not rewrite the past, but they began something new, cautious, steady conversations. Shared coffee at the kitchen table, walks around the block when therapy left her tired but hopeful. The triplets gave Owen space at first. Then Jace invited him to shoot hoops in the driveway. Kala asked about his favorite music. Bryn offered him one of her handmade bookmarks. Slowly, without announcement, he became part of the rhythm. Family dinners at Colton's house became regular. Nothing formal, just pasta, laughter, and stories shared around a worn wooden table. Serena brought dessert sometimes. Owen stayed later each visit. Colton found himself smiling more easily. Grief did not disappear. It never does. But it felt lighter when shared across a table instead of carried alone at night. Serena no longer sat in waiting rooms, staring at folded photographs in silence. When appointments came up, someone texted to ask what time. Someone offered a ride. Someone showed up. And Colton no longer felt like the only adult holding everything together. When the triplets struggled with homework or questions about their mother, Serena listened. She understood hospital hallways and quiet strength. She did not replace what was lost. She reinforced what remained. It was not dramatic. There was no sudden declaration of forever. What formed between them was steadier than that. It was partnership born from showing up. One evening, months later, Serena sat at the same VA waiting room for a routine checkup. The fluorescent lights were still humming. The chairs were still metal. But everything felt different. The triplets sat beside her, arguing softly about who got to hold the snack bag. Colton filled out a simple follow-up form without tension in his jaw. Serena unfolded the old photograph again. The edges were more worn now, but the word promise still stood clear on the back. She looked at the children laughing nearby and realized something important. The promise had never been about being strong alone. It had been about coming back and staying. Owen walked into the waiting room a few minutes later. hands in his pockets, offering a small wave. He sat beside her without hesitation. She was no longer the woman trembling in a corner, afraid the system had erased her. She was a mother receiving treatment, a woman surrounded by people who chose to stand beside her. Colton glanced at her and saw light in her face that had once been missing, not because everything was perfect, but because isolation had been replaced by connection. The triplets were the bridge that started everything. 3 children who noticed a folded photograph and refused to ignore what it meant. Rejected parents had found each other in a waiting room. Loneliness had been interrupted. Grief had been shared. And something steady had formed where silence once lived. Sometimes the smallest folded photograph carries a promise that feels broken until 3 children notice it and remind someone they are still worth standing beside. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it end here. Stay connected to stories that remind us that showing up for someone can change more than one life. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not forgotten, and subscribe if you believe real strength is found in the people who choose to stand beside others. And now I want to ask you something, honestly. If you saw someone sitting alone in their hardest moment, would you notice, or would you look away? Tell me in the comments.